Hello and welcome. We're excited to have everybody here today. We are entering our episode number 2, our second episode of our new PCS podcast, what we call Aha Moments, celebrating great teaching and great teachers. And we're joined here by 4 superstar teachers who will have introduced themselves in just a minute, and to learn about their craft and how maybe their success can help shape your success. My name is Dan Evans, and I'm our Chief Academic Officer for Pinellas County Schools.
And my name is Jolene Jackson, and I am the Director of Professional Development.
And let's begin by maybe having us learn a little bit more about who's with us today. Go ahead.
I'm Sarah Karleski. I teach 5th grade at Cypress Woods Elementary School.
Welcome, Sarah.
I'm Ariel Cork. I teach 4th grade math and science at Douglas L. Jamerson Elementary.
That's great. Welcome.
I'm Lindsay McDowell, and I teach 4th grade ELA at Madeira Beach Fundamental.
Thank you for being here.
Welcome, Lindsay.
I'm Tracy Smith, and I teach ELA 6th grade at Eastlake Middle.
All right, welcome. All right, so we are going to have a conversation today about success criteria, learning targets, whatever you want to call it. But basically, we're really here to talk about how do we get our students from this learning target where we first introduce it, and what's that journey, and what strategies do we leverage to have our students understand the learning target, navigate their way through it all the way to mastery. So we're going to hear a little bit about that today.
We have usually one strategy, or maybe just a couple strategies, one topic for each of one of our episodes. So success criteria is a great strategy talk for today. So are you ready to roll?
I'm ready to roll. Let's get this podcast party started.
All right. So let's just ask, when we think about setting goals for students, setting success criteria, and getting to meet that target, what comes to mind? Who wants to jump in and help us out? Go ahead, Ariel.
I think the biggest thing is not just for them to understand the what, but the why they're learning what they're learning. Because you can have your I can statements and you can read it together, but if they don't have the connection of why they're learning what they're learning, then it doesn't make sense to them and it doesn't ground them as much.
Before we continue, tell us this a little more. When you said I can statements, what is the purpose of that kind of?
So for every lesson, you put the I can statement, which is a learning target for each lesson. And you can put them up on the board and you reference them before you start a lesson. But then having a quick conversation of, well, why is this important? Why is it important that I learn these strategies right now for math when I know the facts already? For them to understand, well, I'm going to use this later on down the road is key. It's completely key. Really neat.
Other thoughts? Go ahead.
I like to take it from the what and the why and also extend it to the how. So they kind of have a roadmap for the entirety of whatever we're doing. So here's what you're learning, that learning target. Here's why it is important to our work in our classroom. And then here's what we're going to do, or the how of our lesson in its entirety today.
Excellent. Thank you, Lindsay. Go ahead.
I also think making connections in every aspect. So not only do they have the learning target for the day, but connecting it to the lessons that they've learned previously, even if it's previous units, as well as connecting it to themselves. So if they see, like she said, why they're learning it and you're making a lesson connected to them, they're going to have more buy-in and be more engaged in the lesson as well.
Well, I thought we were going to talk about success criteria, but you guys took it down a path of just student motivation first to learn and to begin with. Talk a little bit more about who wants to add to that, about just the student motivation to reach that target.
Well, I think the kids are automatically feeding off of our enthusiasm and motivation for a topic. So when we present it in a way that's exciting to them and we say, here, guys, this is what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, and here's how we're going to tackle it together, we automatically are building that enthusiasm in them moving forward with whatever steps we're taking in that lesson.
Wow, great. Go ahead, Ariel.
The word that I'm thinking is purpose. I mean, if you don't feel like you have a purpose to do something, you're not going to put your full heart into doing it. So when we're teaching them the why, the how, and the what, they're now getting a purpose into that lesson, and that's building that buy-in.
That's that first step. Today, that reminds me, when we had our best practices convening, I heard a teacher say her go-to strategy is keeping it real. And then I was like, say more about what keeping it real is, because I haven't read any research paper around keeping it real, But what it is, and she started to talk about it, and it's everything that you all are talking about. As she shared, she's like, well, before we even get started, they need to know why this is so important. You know, you can't, then you can't, they're not bought into wanting to learn until they know. And so then she shares more. It's like, this is what we're going to learn today. This is why we're going to learn it. And then she starts talking about how she scaffolds it. And I was like, oh, so you're like really unpacking the learning target and getting them ready for learning that more. So I love that you hear that that's that first, that you know that's the opening before we even start going into the success criteria, that we do need to get them bought in and sold to even keep going on this journey with you.
Well, and the keeping it real also speaks to the fact that whatever we call the strategies we're employing, if we're doing them well, student learning occurs, even though that was her terminology for what we would call success criteria. Now, I'm glad you brought up the fact that today we are actually post-conference at a conference we had today for some of our best teachers in Pinellas County schools. And that makes U4 unique, because what I know about U4 is you're getting really good results. Students are learning in your classrooms because we've seen it. We've visited your classrooms. We've seen the data. So let's go a little bit further into what it is you think is a strategy you're employing that's creating those results. Go ahead, Sarah.
I think when I look at the standards and I decide like what I'm going to teach, this is the standard I'm required by the state to teach, and how am I going to teach it, and what does this look like in my classroom? I have to unpack that standard, which we've spent years doing in Florida education. And so like looking at the verbs and looking at the content. And then I've learned through courses in the gifted department how to differentiate that for my students, because where my population is, I have a whole variety of students, high achieving, on grade level, English language learners, all of us do. And so I've used Ian Bird's differentiator website to look at differentiating that learning standard, that success criteria, and coming up with what does this look like for every student in my classroom? And it might be a little different. So we're all accessing the same standard and content, but how can I enrich this for the kids who already understand it and change that thinking skill? Or how can I make it a little simpler? Like, what's the bare minimum we need to know? And then how deep can we go? It's kind of like zooming in and panning out on that topic.
Wow. I love hearing that. And there we go again. Great teachers keeping their focus on students. I'm going to turn it back to you and just give you a compliment that what you're doing is saying, I'm going to get them all there, no matter what it takes. And those scaffolds are things that you built in, and congratulations, because your scores really show that. Other thoughts about strategy you employ to bring all kids to learning? Go ahead, Lindsay.
Well, Sarah, I love what you said about the zooming in and the panning out and meeting the needs of all of our students. And I think that one of the ways that I like to do that is to create those success criteria, or change, that task in the form of a checklist. So there's ownership on the students as well. And they have to say, okay, yes, I've done this. Yes, I've done this. And yes, I've done this. And therefore, I have successfully met the expectations for this lesson. And those can be differentiated based on, the population or the needs of each student, as Sarah mentioned, but also giving them a little bit of ownership over the work that they're doing.
I love that. Ari, you're going to say something?
I was going to say, well, all of these pieces are incredibly important, and I do those as well. But the other piece to it is to have those, when you're in the lesson, having the deep understanding and conceptualizing what they're learning. In math, I'm spending time with them. I don't rush through that conceptual understanding. I have the manipulatives on the board. They're working through whiteboards. They are unpacking the standard themselves by really understanding. I don't want them to be in an abstract world at any speed. I want them to really get those standards and grasp them, because as they build on each other, if you've missed that piece, the foundation falls. So I think that foundation and having those deep conversations of that conceptual understanding is really important.
Wow. Tracy, what were you going to say about that?
I think to piggyback on all of those things, I think it's also important to, like when you're teaching a unit or a module, to look at the end goal in mind and work your way backwards from there. So when I'm looking across my lessons and I'm looking at my planning and I see that like this lesson and then maybe 6 lessons later is a repeat of this, but then it jumps back to this, it makes more sense to let's put these together. Let's put these together. So then it flows better and it helps the kids understand where you're going and what your goal is at the end.
Wow. I love that. Mind blown. Go ahead, Jolene.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm thinking about, and Dr. Evans and I talked about this as we were planning the podcast, is that we want to kind of also turn the tables on, well, why wouldn't a teacher do this? Why wouldn't you? And one of the things that I'm sitting here, oh, wow, they go to this website and they're typing in their targets and their depth of knowledge and they're getting the success criteria. This teacher's making checklists and then I'm hearing slowing down to get the foundational skills. And then I'm hearing teachers saying, I don't have time for that. And, why might a teacher say that they don't have time to do this? And then what would your answer be back to them? Like, why is this so incredibly important that you're taking those extra steps to ensure that those students are learning?
I would just say that you're going to make time for what you're passionate about. So for me, teaching, I'm passionate about teaching and I'm passionate about reaching my kids. So that's my number one for me. And that's what I'm going to spend my time doing. Mm-hmm. And we all have lives. We all have children. We all have children extracurricular activities. We coach, we do different things, and you still manage to make time to do those things because you care and it's important.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think a lot of the times, especially when you're a new teacher or even, I'm coming into fourth, it's been 7 years since I taught fourth grade. I'm still learning the content, and it's hard when you're learning the content with the kids. And I think that's where using the professional development and going to rollouts and going and using those tools is so key, because when you understand, and you talked about the understanding the alignment between standards, but even the vertical alignment for all grades for standards of where they're at now, where they came from and where they're going. You don't get that unless you go to PD. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where, make the time, and that's where you get that, that next piece.
I love that. Go ahead, Sarah.
I was just thinking, a lot of times I've been fortunate enough to work on some incredible teams. Fourth grade team with some people up here, the fifth grade team at my school, and I've worked on a fourth grade team at Sandy Lane Elementary in my early career. And I was fortunate enough to have teammates that did the work with me. So I wasn't at home doing it by myself on Saturday. We were working as a team doing it, and we built really close relationships because of that, and connections with each other, and we laughed through it. Sometimes we did it at each other's houses after school, but we found the time we did it together. And now, like my fifth grade team, we attend those paid for planning rollouts, like the topic rollouts for math and paid planning sessions for science together as a team. So we put aside that time, find childcare, and recognize the importance of we can attend this professional development and do this work together. And it's not all on one person on the team's shoulders, and it's not all on you. So really working together.
I love that. I love that. I think for each one of these podcasts, I'm going to have a mind-blown moment. All right, I had one. Okay, you can have one too.
They're aha moments.
Right. That's my blind moment. My mind-blown moment. Sarah's answered how we collaborate as a team, and when we do that, we can really grow our craft. One of the things we like to do on this podcast, we call the aha moments, because I think we all think of that in our careers, whether we've been teaching for 2 years or 20 years. There was this moment or several moments where we really got good at it. And so I'm going to ask you, you don't all have to respond, but maybe to tell us when that moment was where you really thought you really got control of this career, gained skills to really gain confidence. What was your aha moment?
I was fortunate enough early in my career to loop with a group of third graders into fourth grade. And the relationships that I had built with those students was really special. And I think that was the moment that I really felt like I had a good handle on it, because I built those strong relationships with those kiddos in third grade and carried that into fourth grade. And at the same time, found a team of really great educators that I was working with. So finding my people and also just pouring that into my students, that was the year for me that was kind of a turning point.
I love it. How long have you been teaching, Lindsay?
14 years.
Wow. Excellent. Great answer. Good. Ariel?
I was put in an interesting predicament a few years ago. I was teaching third grade, and there was a first grade class that they needed help. That was in between different behavior things that were going on in the classroom. So I took my class, and I had them be mentors to this first grade class, and this was like at the end of the year. And I didn't have a choice. I had to let go. There were too many students. Everything I had taught them came out of their mouths without me doing it. And it was the moment where they do listen. They do hear what you say, and you do have an impact on them. And I will say it was one of the most profounding moments of my entire career.
Wow. You know, I think with each one of these episodes, when we unpack aha moments, Jolene's asked us to reveal some of our own aha moments. You did yours on the last podcast. I'm going to do one right now.
All right, go
and that
for
is because if our topic is success criteria, to be honest with you, that was my aha moment, and understanding even what was meant by that idea. I was a long-time teacher of reading and writing, more of a writing teacher probably even than a reading teacher in high school. And what I realized is every night I was grading their papers, giving them back to them, and doing all the work and all the feedback. And in a sense, it felt like all the thinking. So my aha moment was when I realized that if I just showed them success criteria, or if I showed them great writing over and over and over and modeled for them what great writing was, they could all rise to that level. And what saved me time was I did less grading, I did more peer editing, and more of their reflection and revising against that success criteria. And in my class, for the purpose of giving grades and things, I created, and I've seen many teachers do this, criteria for credit. I'll give you credit, but here's the criteria for success. Here's the criteria for quality. So they would turn it in and get a grade for doing it. But then there was an expectation they would have other feedback when it came to it being really good piece of writing. So success criteria really changed the way I teach, and I think it was my aha moment in my career.
Yeah, that's great. Today we had our media department interviewing teachers, the great teachers that came here today, and giving advice to their first year self, or sharing like something that they focused on too much when they were a younger teacher versus what they focus on now. And several times there was like too much grading, too much like focusing on like making sure that you're grading your papers and all of that sort of thing. And I was having an aha moment as I'm listening to them, is like, as I started, and it's tied perfectly to what we're talking about today around success criteria. Sometimes that's also called like mastery learning, standards-based grading, equitable grading practices, where we're really, instead of whether you got it right or wrong, but really about whether the student understood it, that you get your life back. Like you quit grading papers every night when you're doing all this prep work that you talked about, like creating this success criteria, showing the kids, giving them feedback, these checklists that you've talked about. It's like those sort of things actually help you get your life back in the evening so that you can be free to be with your family and your passion and whatever it is that you're up to.
I love that. I love that. Let's go down one more path here today, and that is with each podcast, we try to tie the work we're doing to the research. And so we like to quote John Hattie on this podcast, but there's a lot of researchers out there. But it's just, it's the point where we've experienced the strategy, we've read about it maybe in a book, we've taken it in a training, and then we see it in the research. And when I look at all of that and I pay attention to that, when we hear high expectations, mastery or standards-based teaching and grading, expecting all kids to meet the standard, that's when a breakthrough typically occurs in teaching. As I say those words, what comes to mind that might be a process maybe you use in your classroom that gets kids to that standard, formative assessment, checks for understanding, that kind of thing? What resonates when I say those words to somebody here on the panel? Okay, Lindsay.
Those checklists that I mentioned are really beneficial in that way. I do a lot of exit tickets and just quick checks in my room, whether that be apply it to what I just read with you or we read together, or hey, grab your independent reading book. Reading's like, I'm super, super passionate about putting, real words in front of the kids each day. So take out your independent reading book, get a sticky note, show me that you can apply what I just taught you in your book. And then I can quickly check mastery and understanding based on that, pull a small group the next day, or use that to kind of push my, next steps and what happens in the days coming past that.
Okay, Sarah?
There's a Marzano book, and I'm not sure if it's a highly effective educator. I can't remember which one it is, but he has learning scales in there. And that was kind of my starting point when we were diving into like unpacking standards and then looking at what does this look like in a level 4, 3, 2, 1, right? Like, so what is your criteria? What's the on grade level? What does it look like above grade level? And then if you're just approaching that, like what exactly would that look like if you were doing a task? And so he has hundreds of them written out, but using that as a starting point. So you're not kind of starting from scratch and really understanding like, what do I want my kids to learn? But then what does that look like when they've learned it? What does that sound like? And helping to understand that. And some of our district staff developers like Carrie Greetham would work through, we would bring work samples to our ELA champion meetings. And then she'd say, you guys mark these as above grade level, but they're really just on grade level. And so having that professional conversation, candid conversation about then what would that 4 look like? Or what does this really look like? Are they, just because they wrote long doesn't mean they understood it, or they used a lot of big words, but they didn't really meet that learning task. And so having those conversations with colleagues.
One of the things that we have as a theme throughout this podcast is teacher efficacy, which is confidence and skill, but also student efficacy, right? I'm confident, I can do it. Because one of the phrases we like to use on this podcast is confidence is not a cologne. And it's the idea that I actually have to teach students the skill set for them to be confident and to know what excellent work looks like the examples you're giving. So thank you for that, Sarah. This has been an amazing conversation. Mind blown.
Yes.
What is one of your takeaways today on the podcast?
Well, it's one that you and I talk about a lot, and that is the power of communities of practice and community learning. And another overarching theme in just 2 episodes is the power of learning together in our professional learning communities. And I just am curious about seeing that come out as another thread. And and then that central messaging that's going out to all of our listeners around the power of learning together as we are learning how to be the most effective teachers. And that teacher efficacy is built by coming together with other educators.
I couldn't agree more. And I'll tell you what, we made a promise in this school district through this podcast and other ways to elevate our teacher practice, celebrate our teachers, bring our teachers together for conversations like this. And that makes us all better. We're better together.
Yes.
We're certainly better together. So thank you all for being here today. We look forward to more conversations about best practice. And we ask you to join us next time when we have our
Aha moments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.